Now, Mr. President, the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery catapulted the issues of racial justice, police violence, systemic racism to the forefront of this nation's conscience. These issues are not new. Some are even older than the nation itself. And the anger felt by hundreds of thousands of protesters is about that historical and pervasive injustice. It's rooted in our decade-long failure to reform police departments and the yawning gap between our ideal of equal justice under law and the reality of equal justice for only some. America's an experiment. The Founding Fathers said that. We know it deep in our bones. An experiment means you can change. And some of the best observers of the difference, I think de Tocqueville was one of these, of America and the difference between us and other countries, we are willing to change. I am touched and moved. I was with the demonstrators on Saturday in New York, in Brooklyn, of how many people were there, great diversity, and how many were young and idealistic and doing things for just the right reasons, not selfish reasons, but for the better of the country, to make us a more perfect union. We must seize this moment. We cannot let it pass. This isn't about simply renewing a national dialogue, though dialogue is always important. It's about action. It's about making real and meaningful progress. And the way to do that is with comprehensive police reform legislation in Congress. So House and Senate Democrats have already drafted legislation that would ban the use of chokeholds and other tactics that have taken the lives of Black Americans like George Floyd, Eric Garner. That would also ban the use of no-knock warrants in drug cases, which is one of the reasons for the death of Breonna Taylor. That would limit the transfer of military equipment to police departments. And crucially, that would make it easier to hold police accountable for misconduct, as well as institute several reforms to prevent that misconduct in the first place. The moment does not call for cherry-picking one or two things to do. It calls for bold, broad change. Whole-scale reform, not piecemeal reform. I know the inclination of some of my Senate colleagues would be to cherry-pick a few small improvements and say the job's done. It will not be. We need to start with the Justice in Policing Act, a strong, comprehensive bill that people, particularly Senators Booker and Harris, CBC, spent a lot of time with experts who have studied this issue for many, many months and years. For too long, when major issues wash over the country, the waves of change and progress crash against the rocks of a disinterested Republican Senate majority. When Americans watched in horror as another spate of mass shootings rocked the nation, they rose up and demanded change. President Trump and Senate Republicans initially tried to make the right noises. Leader McConnell promised that a debate on expanding background checks would be, quote, front and center in the Senate after shootings in Dayton and El Paso. But predictably, that debate never came to pass. That seems to be the MO of our Republican friends. When there's a national crisis, major issues, people in the streets worried and concerned and want change, we hear words, and then the strategy is delay, and at the end, do nothing. So, we cannot go through these same motions again. This is about the original sin of America that we must try to deal with head-on. Americans in the streets, shouting at the top of their lungs for change, young people, idealistic people, the best of America. The Senate must pursue comprehensive reform, not the lowest common denominator, and certainly not more empty rhetorical resolutions. Of course, there's another crisis in the country crying out for action and leadership. The COVID-19 pandemic didn't go away while the nation rightfully turned its eyes to issues of racial justice. Yesterday, the United States eclipsed 2 million cases of coronavirus. Another 1.5 million Americans filed for unemployment this week. Federal Reserve officials, sober, non-political, are predicting that, best case, we'll end the year around 10% unemployment, a staggering figure, 1 out of every 10. 1 out of every 10. The disease is spiking in a number of states around the country. Arizona officials have warned that its hospitals could be filled by next month. Texas has gone 3 straight days with record numbers of hospitalizations. North Carolina, New Mexico, California, Oregon, and several other states are experiencing a resurgence or peak levels of COVID-19. As the President continues to fixate on the stock market, and Senate Republicans are prematurely ready to declare victory, we need to wrest the focus back to these crucial issues. So today, I'm requesting that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and other members of the administration's coronavirus task force conduct a briefing for Democratic senators on the recent spikes, and do it next week. We need to understand why these spikes are happening and how to adapt our national response. The President, always interested in himself, not in the good of the country, was too quick to sideline the coronavirus task force, too eager to pretend that everything was back to normal and better than ever. The country needs Dr. Fauci on billboards, but the President wants to put him on a milk carton. The Vice President yesterday was photographed with campaign staffers in a tight space, no social distancing, without anyone wearing a mask. The very least the administration could do is lead by example, and often cannot even manage that much. At the same time, we cannot forget that the issues of racial justice and COVID-19 are intricately related. The COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately kills Black Americans. Communities of color have less access to quality health care, greater food insecurity, greater percentages of poverty, and a disproportionate number of our frontline essential workers, 41.2%, are African American and Latino. The majority of African Americans are renters and dedicate more than 50% of their income to rent. The truth is, an emergency bill on COVID-19 is a racial justice issue too. Hazard pay for essential workers is a racial justice issue too. Health care is a racial justice issue too. Rent assistance and forbearance from eviction is a racial justice issue too. These are all items that must be discussed in another COVID relief bill. And it's past time to get to work. African Americans, Latinos, other minorities are taking the economic hit from the coronavirus on the chin. But Senate Republicans, led by Leader McConnell, are reportedly unwilling to consider another emergency relief bill until late July. How many more workers will lose their jobs between now and late July? How many renters will be kicked out of their homes between now and late July? How many state and local government workers will lose their jobs as state and local governments meet their budget deadlines on July 1st and don't have the dollars to deal with them? How many of them will lose their jobs? Wait till late July. It's callous, it's cold, and it's wrong for our economy. The Republican majority seems to have a whole lot of time to push right-wing judges. That's what they want to do next week. And both of their judges that they nominate, to show the hypocrisy of those who talk about wanting to help and compare it to their actions, both of those judges have an antipathy to our health care law. In the middle of the public health care crisis, the Republican majority thinks it can get away with stuff like this, but they can't. Americans are catching on. One of the nominees, Corey Wilson, with an alarming record on voting rights in the middle of a national reckoning on racial injustice, you're all going to vote for him? This guy's opposed voting rights, and you're going to vote for him. They oppose health care, you're going to vote for him. And then you're going to give nice speeches how you want equality. The two have to add up together. The Republican majority also seems to have time to chase all of President Trump's wild conspiracy theories about how he was wronged by law enforcement. The poor, beleaguered President Trump. My goodness. That's what's happening in judiciary today. The Republican Majority Leader McConnell can devote time to that, but they can't commit to time on the floor about how Black Americans are being wronged by law enforcement. In order to bring a small appearance of fairness to this ridiculous Judiciary Committee vote today, Democrats will be requesting subpoenas for Trump campaign associates like Michael Cohen, Rick Gates, George Papadopoulos, Michael Flynn, among others. These men have at one time or another pled guilty to offenses related to Putin's interference in the election. Let's hear what they have to say, or as this should be just a one-sided kangaroo court to please President Trump. If the Republican Conspiracy Caucus wants to waste the Senate's time dredging up old conspiracy theories about the previous election, let's at least get the straight story. Let's at least hear witnesses who might have something different to say. This is not a dictatorship. This is not how courts or hearings are supposed to work, I would say to the Republican chairman. And it's beneath his dignity and the dignity of the body to conduct such sham kangaroo court hearings. I yield the floor.